If you've been in the budget 3D printing space over the last year, or you've been looking to upgrade your 3D printer, there's a good chance you've heard of a company called BigTreeTech. For some time, I wanted to dive into the world of 32-bit 3D printing and upgrade one of my machines, but I was often turned away by the really high entry point of most of the 32-bit boards on the market. With so many budget 3D printers, including many of the ones I have being sub $300, I had a hard time swallowing the idea of spending $100 or in some cases a couple $100 on a 32-bit board upgrade for that machine. Well, that is where BigTreeTech really shines, and they came out with quite a few different 32-bit boards that were much more budget-friendly compared to the ones on the existing market. And last year in February, I installed their SKR mini board into my Creality Ender 3, which has been going strong. This is a $50 board that is, again, 32-bit, and it comes with Trinamic drivers built into it. Since then, I've tested out quite a few different BigTreeTech products on the channel, and overall, I've become a huge fan. Now, in mid-2020, BigTree announced that they were going to be bringing their own 3D printer to the market, the Biqu B1. Since BigTreeTech does make most of the parts needed to upgrade these other desktop 3D printers, to me, it only really made sense as the next step for the company. Now, originally, I saw quite a bit of things about the B1, and I was getting really excited about it, but I was surprised that it seemed to kind of fall by the wayside, and I really didn't see much about it other than the initial kind of teaser and announcement of this printer. Now, I imagine there was probably a couple of different reasons why the B1 didn't get the level of hype that I was initially expecting, and one of those reasons is that BigTreeTech, or BQ, which are the same company, actually launched a Kickstarter 3D printer shortly after the B1 was announced. And this Kickstarter printer was really inexpensive and had a direct drive, so I think that the B1 kind of got lost in the shadows of their Kickstarter machine. Now, with that being said, I have still really wanted to test out the B1 all this time because of the specs and the price point, which is sub $300. And when BigTreeTech finally reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to test out the B1? I said, absolutely. So I've been testing out the Biqu B1 printer over the past few weeks here, and in today's video, we are going to dive right in. We will cover the specs of the B1, we will cover what the assembly and setup has been like, we will cover the sort of initial calibration, printing, and after that, of course, we will go into my kind of final conclusion as to whether I still think after using it that the B1 lives up to the initial hype that it at least had built for me. So if you are looking to get a budget 3D printer or add another one to your existing lineup, this video is definitely for you. As always with our reviews, there is a ton to cover. So without further ado, let's get right into today's video. I did want to just jump in here and say that at the time of recording this, we are about 1,200 subscribers away from 50,000, and based off the way things have been going, there is a good chance we will be there before the next video. So huge thank you guys. That is such a massive milestone that I can't believe that we are about to hit and accomplish, and I couldn't have done that, of course, without all of your guys' support and coming back and liking and sharing and subscribing. So just wanted to say that to you all. Now let's get right into the B1. In a similar fashion to how we normally do things, let's first run through the technical specs of the Biqu B1. The B1 has a build volume of 235 by 235 by 270 millimeters. It's a 24-volt system powered by BigTreeTech's SKR 1.4, which again is a 32-bit board. Similar to most budget 3D printers on the market as of right now, the Biqu B1 is made up primarily of aluminum extrusions. It is a Bowden type extrusion system and does have a filament runout sensor that is mounted next to the metal extruder. The hot end is not all metal, and it is sandwiched between 3 different fans. You have one fan, which is your heatsink cooling fan, and you have 2 fans that are actually your layer cooling fans. This machine does have manual bed leveling by adjusting 4 large knobs and comes standard with a flex plate system to print on. As far as the bed's material, it appears to be a very thin spring steel sheet that has a sort of textured painted surface on it. The Z-axis is driven by one motor and lead screw, and the system is using traditional V-slot wheels. As for interfacing with this machine, you will find BigTreeTech's TFT35, which is a 3.5-inch touchscreen fixated to the front of the machine. This screen is very unique in the sense that it's actually got 2 different interfaces on it. So if you turn on the machine, it'll automatically boot into their sort of touch screen OS, where that's how I like to use it. You've got all of your different buttons that you can go through, and there's a lot of different settings that they've encompassed in this side of the OS, Well, if you hold down the rotary knob, it'll actually take you over to what looks like a traditional Marlin menu. So for someone that maybe just doesn't like the touchscreen, you've got the ability to use the rotary wheel and go through your kind of more standard Marlin menu as well. The screen will give you the option of printing with a full-size flash drive or a micro SD card, and of course there is USB interface if you want to hook up the B1 directly to a computer or to a Raspberry Pi running Octoprint. Might be a small detail for some, but kind of cool. The fan shroud that is clear and the rotary knob both have like RGB LEDs, and so you can change the color of the knob, you can change the color of your fan shroud, and if you don't want to do anything too flashy, you can just have them both white, which will help to illuminate your print service if you are watching your print at night. Cable management on this machine is incredibly clean, using a setup that I have never seen before. The heater cartridge, the heater thermistor, and the 3 fans are all routed through one USB-C cable that plugs into a USB input on the back of the machine. Again, not something I've seen before, but for the sake of just cleanliness and not having to worry about a cable pinching something, it is a really clean design. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, the B1 does come with manual leveling stock. However, it does come with a metal bracket that you can bolt onto the front of the machine, which is meant to mount a BL Touch. And on the back of the machine, there's actually an input where you can just plug in the BL Touch. So if you did want to add automatic bed leveling to this machine, it is probably the easiest setup I've seen on any printer to add automatic bed leveling to, which is a huge plus. Next, as we've become accustomed to, I did go ahead and pop the bottom panel off of the machine so that way we could take a look at the electronics underneath, and there was a lot more going on than I initially had anticipated. Below you will find the 24 volt 360 watt power supply, which will power your printer. You're also going to find the BigTreeTech SKR V1.4 board, which is running Marlin 2.0, and it's been fitted with Trinamic TMC 2225 Polulu style stepper motor drivers. You will also see the back panel for the TFT35 touchscreen. One thing that was really unique that I saw going on down there was a breakout board that was fixated on the back of the machine. On just about every 3D printer that I've ever used, the cables for the thermistor, heater cartridge, fans, motors, all those things go from their respective components through their cables down to the main board, and you've got a bunch of different independent cables. Well, with this setup, pretty much all of the cables are going to this breakout board, and you just have 2 plugs. You have the USB-C cable that goes from the back of the machine to your hot end assembly, then you've got the bed cable, which is quite a few different cables all put into one that goes into your bed, and as I mentioned a moment ago, you have the option to plug in a BL Touch. So really liking this kind of clean aesthetic, or this clean cable management that they've got going on. It's nice for both functionality and form, and definitely something I would like to see more implemented by other manufacturers. Now that we've covered the specs, let's talk about what my initial setup was like on the B1. The B1 arrived in a box that was very well packaged, and to be honest was quite a bit smaller than I was expecting for this machine, and upon opening it I realized the reason why it was so small. It was because the printer was in more pieces than I'm typically used to on a lot of the budget printers that I've been spoiled with. A lot of the machines I've been using nowadays, it's just the top assembly and the bottom assembly, a couple of bolts, attach the filament spool holder, and you're ready to rock and roll, while the B1 did come in quite a few different components, which is how they were able to fit it in a smaller box. With that being said, the B1 is by no means a full kit. A full kit, in my opinion, is a machine that will take you somewhere between 6 to 10 hours to assemble, and you've just got a bunch of parts with screws that you've got to put together. I don't remember exactly how long it took me to assemble the B1, but for most people, I'd say somewhere in the ballpark of 30 minutes to an hour is about what you can expect. The instructions came on a one sheet that was fairly large. It had each and every step nicely labeled, and one of the biggest things that Biqu did, which to me definitely deserves a hat off compared to some of the other manufacturers I've dealt with, is that all the screws were in bags that were labeled, but not only were they labeled for what the kind of screws they were as far as the diameter and the length, they were also labeled as far as the step they'd be needed for. So if you grabbed a bag thinking it was for this certain thing and it said step 5 but you were on step 4, you would very quickly know that this is not the correct screw. So it's a small detail, but it's things like this that to me make a huge difference in the overall experience of using and assembling one of these machines. Once I had the machine assembled, I grabbed a piece of printer paper and quickly leveled the 4 corners of the machine. I loaded in some PLA and I was ready to print. Like I normally do, I plugged in the included memory card to see if there were any pre-sliced files, and for whatever reasoning, I don't know if the micro SD card was corrupted, but I wasn't able to see anything. So I plugged it into my computer, was able to see that there were indeed files on there. I transferred them over to a flash drive, which is my preferred method of interfacing anyways, and then I plugged it in and was able to see that there were 2 files on the flash drive. And so I went ahead and printed out both of them. One of them was named Pokemon and one of them was named Bear. The Pokemon was a Pokemon. It was a small Bulbasaur file that I don't know what they sliced it at, but it was something ridiculously low resolution because the part was, or the model was probably no more than like 1 inch by 1 inch, but it took a couple of hours to print. Now, with that being said, the resolution and detail on it for being an FDM printer is incredible, but in my experience, or at least in my opinion, it was a very interesting choice to have included as the sample print. Regardless, the print did turn out very nicely, and the only issue I ran into was that the nozzle, even though I had leveled it, was still a bit too far away from this build surface. Luckily, with the OS, there is baby stepping or micro stepping built into it, and so I was able to click on the screen just a couple times to drop the nozzle down just a few ticks, and the adhesion was perfect. I then went ahead and printed out the Bear model, which, very similar to the Pokemon model, was a very, very small print that was sliced at a ridiculously low resolution. If I had to guess, it was probably 100 microns, but I wouldn't be surprised based off of the amount of time it took if they sliced it at an even lower 50 microns. I get these models if this was a resin printer, and maybe other people would disagree with me, and seeing these small detailed models is something that they like to see because they can see, oh wow, look at the resolution on this machine. But if it were me, I think I'd rather have a benchmark print or something that's just a bit bigger to kind of show what the machine is capable of and that it's functioning correctly. Again, small detail, but just my 2 cents. Now that I'd printed out these cute little test files that were on there, I was ready to do some functional 3D printing. If you saw last week's video, you know that I printed out all of the high impact polystyrene or HIPS parts on the Biqu B1. The only thing that I did different than its stock was I threw an enclosure on top of it and I swapped out the painted build surface for Wham Bam's powder coated PEI build surface. If you do want to see that video and see a little bit more detail on my experience using HIPS on this machine, then I will place those links down below. But the bottom line is that this machine did a really, really good job of printing out the high impact polystyrene, and I did quite a few different functional parts, and I was very pleased with the result of what I got off of the B1. As far as slicing goes, there was a Cura profile on the included flash drive. I did originally use my Ender 3 profile, which ended up not being the best thing to do because my Ender 3 profile was built for a direct drive, and so I ran into a little bit of stringing issues and ended up importing the Biqu B1 profile after the fact, and once I did that, things went a lot smoother. Once I was done with the HIPS filament, I went ahead and loaded the Orange Matter Hackers Build Series PLA back into the B1, and I found a really cool model over on my mini factory. My sister-in-law got a Nintendo Switch for Christmas that came with Mario Kart, and I found a model of what they describe as like a Mario Kart Pro nunchuck controller or something like that, but essentially it is a small steering wheel that the Nintendo Switch's nunchuck can pop into, and so when you're playing the game, instead of holding the tiny little Joy-Con, you can actually hold the steering wheel. And I thought it was an awesome model, and because it had some built-in buttons, I figured it would be a really sweet test just to see how well this machine handled some kind of tight tolerances. I did go ahead and slice this at a very low resolution of either 0.1 or 0.15, which is definitely less than I ever would normally do. 200 microns is kind of my sweet spot for print quality and time because, again, if you're going to be taking days and days and days to print things, to me it doesn't make sense. But anyways, the 3D modeler that had made this recommended printing at a very low resolution because the buttons were built in, and to make sure that the tolerances were there for the buttons to be able to move and not weld to the actual main housing, I did go ahead and print at a low resolution. The print took somewhere around the ballpark of I think 18 hours, but it did turn out really nicely and the buttons were able to move. I did pop the Joy-Con in, and when I pressed down the two buttons, or the two shoulder buttons, I can feel the Joy-Con's top buttons engaging, so I'm really excited to bring this over on the weekend. The only thing I noticed that was a bit of a bummer was that when I removed the steering wheel from the Biqu spring steel sheet, that some of the paint had actually flaked off the black paint coating onto the printed part and was now bonded with the part. It was just a couple of small flakes, but definitely not something that I was super excited for. At least as far as adhesion goes, it did work really well, but again, wasn't stoked about some of the paint already flaking off onto my printed part. Once that was complete, I wanted to print out a character model. I had recently been talking about Lilo and Stitch, and so when I found a Stitch model, I knew that it was destined and I needed to print out Stitch. I went ahead and downloaded him into Cura, and the model was quite small, so I did scale it up, I believe 250%, and I changed the resolution from the 0.1 or 0.15 to my standard 0.2. Now this model definitely could have used some supports on the head of the model and potentially on the ears, but I kind of wanted to stress test this machine just to see how well the cooling would work for some of these really steep overhangs, so I opted to not add supports. I went ahead and sliced up the model and hit print. I would say that the Biqu B1 did a fantastic job with the Stitch model. Definitely under the neck or the nose where it's completely vertical, you can see some filament that's drooping ever so slightly, which would happen with any machine. I was really impressed though on the ears, although they are kind of in a up step direction where it isn't as much of a outward vertical overhang. It did a really good job, and to me the ears turned out much better than I was initially anticipating, and I would definitely call this print a success. I followed this up with a very large print of a Cthulhu dice tower that I found over on my mini factory. One of my buddies does quite a bit of tabletop gaming, and usually when I'm printing out sample parts or parts for the sake of reviewing a printer, I print things either that are functional that I'm gonna need or that I know that I can gift to somebody. And in this instance, I saw this model, saw that it was large, saw that it was detailed, and I figured this would be a perfect example of something to print out. So I downloaded the model, I sliced it at 200 microns, and I swore I added supports, but after waking up the next morning, I discovered that I had not. But this was a massive 30-hour print. Luckily, there was only one portion that actually needed to have those supports, which is where the dice exits the dice tower, and I was, with my hands and the combination of some flush cutters, able to remove much of the loose filament that was drooping. But other than that, which was user error, the part turned out amazing, and considering how long of a print it was and the detail that the print had, this definitely proved to me that the B1 is absolutely able to produce some beautiful detailed parts. The last thing I printed out was a PETG fan shroud, which goes over the right side of the machine, which I still need to install, but it is a fan silencer or a fan muffler, if you will. We'll cover that a bit more in a moment here. Overall, my experience with the Biqu B1 has been excellent, and I'm really scratching my head still, as I thought I was going to be, as to why this is not a machine that more people are recommending. Currently, this printer retails at about $280, which is roughly $80 more than the Ender 3. However, a lot of people that get the Ender 3 end up upgrading it to the SKR mini board, which is about $50, and the BigTreeTech touchscreen of one way, shape, or form, which can be anywhere between another $30 to $50. So at that point, you're actually spending more money by going with the Ender 3 and upgrading it versus getting all of these things pre-built in. You don't have to wire them, you don't have to configure firmware, you've got the ability to easily add a BL Touch, and you've at least got a magnetic base and spring steel sheet. So if you are getting an Ender 3, or if you're looking for a machine, you don't really plan on doing all the upgrades, then totally the price difference could be justifiable of the $80 to $100. But if you know you plan on doing those upgrades, this is definitely a sweet option. And unless you enjoy doing the upgrades and are kind of doing it for the sake of it, for the learning experience or whatever your reasoning is, I definitely would recommend the Biqu B1 to just have it, essentially turnkey out of the box with all those mods already installed. Now, in my time printing with the Biqu B1, there's really only two things that stand out to me that are things that I feel should and could be improved upon. The first is that spring steel bed, which I mentioned a moment ago. Now, I've only had this thing for a few weeks, and in that time, I'm already starting to see small pieces of the bed come off into my printed parts. Now, this hasn't affected the functionality of the printer, and things are still sticking very well, but it doesn't excuse the fact that if you are printing something, again, with a light filament, you don't want small fragments of bed paint coming off onto your printed parts, which this, again, leads me to believe that the build surface is more of a painted surface and certainly not something that's powder coated. I do think that they can improve upon this by either one, changing their process of actually manufacturing these beds, or going with something that's a bit more hardy like PEI in a powder coated type setup. To me, that would be a huge game changer. But again, if nothing else, at least when you get this, you do have the magnetic base on here. And if you do decide to upgrade your build surface to something like the Wham Bam powder coated sheet, you can just get the powder coated top portion and swap it on, and you're ready to rock and roll. But again, the spring steel sheet on here, they've got the right idea, but I definitely think that it needs a little bit more improvement as far as their manufacturing methods. The second thing, which is really me just kind of pet peeving about things, is that the fan on the right side of this machine, which is the motherboard fan, the exhaust fan for the motherboard, is too loud. In most instances, and like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of machines I printed with that have louder fans than this, but the fact that this machine is a 32-bit board and that it has dynamic drivers, pretty much everything on this machine is really quiet. The motion's quiet, even the fans around the hot end, which there's 3 fans to me, are pretty damn quiet. It's just the fan on the right-hand side that is always on when you switch the machine on that to me creates too much noise. I did print out this small little PETG, or not super small, but this PETG part that supposedly helps to change the direction that the audio is coming from the fan, or helps to muffle it a bit, and I haven't tested it out myself, but I don't think this is something that you should really have to do. And you know, I'm sure if BQ just went with a different fan, or, you know, a fan with some slightly better bearings, it would really help to lower the volume of the fan. And again, small detail, doesn't affect functionality, but if you can have a completely silent machine, why would you not want that? With that being said, this has been the Biqu B1. Let me know in the comments down below a couple things. Let me know, one, if you have any questions about anything related to this machine that I maybe did not cover, but I also really want to know how many of you have actually heard of or seen this machine before watching my video. I, again, have the impression that this machine is really flying underneath the radar, which is a bit disappointing because compared to a lot of things that are out there, and again, with BigTreeTech being one of the main companies people are upgrading their low-cost machines to, having all of these things built in for your average user that maybe doesn't want to tinker with firmware or wiring things in, to me is a huge one-up over some of their competition. So I'd really like to know how many of you guys have actually even heard of this machine before. As always, I'll place links down below in the description to where if you want to find out more or purchase one for yourself, you are able to. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great videos. I make a video every single Saturday, so there is always fresh content coming your way, and I've got some pretty sick videos coming out I think you guys are going to be really excited for. If you do want to support the channel furthermore, I'll place links down below to my Patreon where there are some really cool rewards. We have gotten a lot of new Patreon supporters as of recently, so huge thank you to all of you. You guys really rock. There's some cool rewards. I really appreciate you guys allowing me to spend more time doing what I love, which is making content for you guys all to enjoy. And on that note, this has been Daniel from ModBot. I look forward to seeing you guys in my next video. Peace, guys.